Are you a woman in the corporate world striving to break barriers, challenge unconscious bias, and lead the way for women in leadership roles globally? If so, this is the podcast for you. Introducing Leading Ladies Who Lunch. The lunch hour is usually the time when colleagues get together for real, honest conversations about work, life, and everything in between. In each episode of Leading Ladies Who Lunch, we'll delve into insightful discussions and share actionable strategies to help you navigate corporate life. Co-hosted by me, Cicy George, a leadership development architect and inspirational speaker. I'm thrilled to share my experience and expertise on leadership, mentorship, and organizational intelligence to help you own your career.
And me, Rachel Lowndes, CEO and founder, Imposter Syndrome expert, and mindset coach at Rachel Lowndes Coaching and Consulting. Passionate about helping women conquer imposter syndrome and unleash their inner confidence to get the recognition and promotions they deserve.
Jam-packed with insightful conversations, expert advice, and inspiring stories from a diverse group, we'll explore how to overcome obstacles, shatter those glass ceilings, and build unshakable mindsets to unlock your true potential. So whether you're sipping a coffee or enjoying a meal at your desk, tune in for a no-host bar lunchtime chat. Episodes will be dropped every 2 weeks. You can find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button.
Leading Ladies Who Lunch, empowering women, one conversation at a time.
Welcome back, everyone, to the Leading Ladies Who Lunch podcast. Rachel, sweetie, I've been looking forward to this conversation all day. How are you?
Oh, hey, Cicy, it's great to be back. I'm good, although it's been really hot here in Australia at the moment. What's happening with you?
Hot over there? Oh my gosh, it's been like 30s here. So I think I might can we just trade a little bit my cold for your hot? That might be kind of nice.
I'll send some.
Please. I am trying to fast forward to spring, but we are in the longest month of the year, January. So I have to learn patience.
Yeah.
But I want to tell you, the other day I was rummaging through an old box of memories and photos, and I came across this picture that I think was taken about a decade ago. And this picture, it's a picture of me standing at a podium in a room full of 75 doctors, maybe 100 people total, senior leaders all throughout the organization. And from the picture, you would think, oh, she looks intelligent, she looks smart, she looks like she really knows her stuff.
You do?
The funny thing is, I just remember how I felt. I was nervous. I was so nervous. In fact, I think I almost made myself sick in the days leading up to me giving that big presentation. Even that morning, I had, those knots that you get in the pit of your stomach where you're like, oh, I don't want to do this. I don't want to get off that roller coaster.
Yeah, for sure.
And all I can think about was, how am I, this non-clinical corporate professional, supposed to get up in front of a room full of doctors and senior leaders and convince them to follow a training plan that I prepared? I'm not a physician. I wasn't a PhD. I honestly thought that those guys were going to instantly figure me out and know that, well, this chick, she really doesn't have a clue, and boo me off stage. It was awful. Okay, so am I alone in this, or have you ever experienced anything like that before?
Well, not quite the same, but similar. I mean, I've definitely had that fear that someone was going to find me out for being an absolute charlatan and a fraud. And in fact, in my last full-time job, I used to freak out every time the CFO would swing by my desk, thinking, "Oh my God, he's finally found me out. He's going to ask me to leave." And I'd even say to him, "Is it time?" He'd be like, "What?" And I'd say, "Have you come to ask me to leave?" I mean, he was always quite surprised by when I said that, which is understandable. But I mean, I made a bit of a joke about it. But the reality was I was genuinely scared that I had been found out. So,
Right.
I mean, don't you just love it when your mind monkeys do the dirty on you like that?
mind monkeys, charlatan, and all. Yeah, that's all of those descriptors, I think, work perfectly well here. And it's funny because it took me I don't know about you, it took me a really long time to realize that I wasn't the only person who ever felt like this at
Mhm.
times.
Mm.
I think that's why I'm so excited for today's topic, where we're going to talk about imposter syndrome, what it is, how it shows up, and importantly, what can you do about it? So, Rachel, I'm really excited because you are our resident expert. I appreciate your knowledge on this topic so much. Can you do us a favor and please shed some light on this phenomenon for us?
Certainly can. So, for anyone who doesn't know, let me explain. Imposter syndrome is when an individual believes that they are not as talented, capable, experienced, or knowledgeable as other people seem to think that they are. And the fascinating thing about these feelings is that they exist despite usually overwhelming or compelling evidence to suggest otherwise. So there's this disconnect between who we actually are and how we see ourselves.
Right.
Now, to be 100% clear here, imposter syndrome isn't actually a syndrome at all. It's not a
Mm.
psychological disorder. You are not broken and you don't need medication to fix you. The actual term is imposter phenomenon, which was first coined by two female psychologists, Pauline Clance and Suzanne Imes, in 1978. Now, it's very common and it affects 70% of the population at one time or another. Now, imposter syndrome is very specific to achievement arenas like business, career, performance, that type of thing, right? We don't want to mix it up with self-esteem, which is kind of a more global sense that we have of ourselves, right? You don't
Sure.
feel like an imposter when you're out walking the dog or unpacking the dishwasher, but you might
Right.
if you're about to go into a job interview, deliver a presentation, or find yourself in a meeting room with very senior people and potentially you might get asked a question, for example.
Hmm.
So these feelings of self-doubt, intellectual inadequacy, and anticipated failure typically plague high achievers who link their success to external factors like luck or timing, help from others, or even like the simplicity of the task, right? Rather than giving themselves credit for their own skills and merit.
Exactly. Right. So when a person experiences this imposter syndrome,
Mm,
they truly believe that they don't deserve success or recognition or accolade because they think that others are just fooled into thinking otherwise. And
yeah,
that's why there's often this fear of being, quote, found out or discovered or unmasked
yeah.
because the person believes that they're giving off an impression that they're more competent than they are and have these really deep feelings that they're lacking knowledge or expertise. On
Hmm.
top of that, they might also believe that they don't deserve a position or a promotion or the recognition or accolades. And they're so anxious that somebody just made a mistake. Someone
Yeah,
call HR, they've got the wrong name. It's really not me.
yeah,
And you'll notice imposter syndrome showing up if you catch someone saying something like, I don't know, I just got lucky, or I don't deserve it. I was just in the right place at the right time. Or for someone like me, who identifies as being in the minority group, I might say something like, oh, that was just to fill a quota. It was just part of they needed the
mm,
stats to have diverse representation or something, some derivative of that, you
yeah.
know? So here are a few other ways I think you can identify imposter syndrome is creeping in.
Mm,
I know I've definitely experienced this one. So you might have been working in a role for a couple of months, but when people call you by your formal title, you feel like a fraud because you feel like, I don't think I've mastered that position yet. So
yeah.
why are you associating me with that? Or I love this one. You started a new job and maybe it's a higher title, but you don't want to promote yourself because you don't have the same level of experience or expertise as others on the team, and that makes you feel like a fraud.
Yeah, like you don't belong.
Or,
Yeah.
right, even this one. How about this? You've been nominated for an award, but you feel like an imposter while you're sitting at that recognition event because you don't feel like your achievements are good enough to warrant that nomination.
Oh, yeah.
And, I'm going to add, I kind of touched on it briefly, but being a woman of color, it just adds another compounding layer to this behavioral health phenomenon because in the workplace, women of color like me, I'm already feeling the need that I have to try harder, that it's not enough. I have to prove myself over and over and over again. I have to prove myself to a degree that I feel like my counterparts do not have to.
Mm,
So in the environment, I would say early in my career, I didn't see too many people of color always in the environments that I worked in. But of
mm,
course, that was going back 20 plus years ago. So that landscape has now, since then, it's changed.
hmm.
And I would usually feel compared to my non-colored counterparts who I just thought seemed to fit in, unlike
Right.
me, who I felt like I struggled because I felt like I was always different because of my skin color and maybe my non-colored, non-people of colored counterparts would get things easier that I just didn't. That was the internal monologue I had going on in my head, that it
Right.
wasn't good enough.
Yeah.
And well, your
Yeah.
white counterparts are just getting it at a rate that you're just not, like something, I'm lacking something, right? So this is that negative self-talk. And when it came to my career, I couldn't help but wonder, was I passed over for something because of this?
Mm,
For promotions or opportunities or exposure or experience. And I always thought that because I felt I fit a need. And I'm sorry, but that question does linger in my head. Is it because you just weren't the look they were going for? They were going for some other person who met that need. So, having explained all that, then you have the whole phenomenon itself. It really does a doozy on someone who's trying to, make their career something, pretty amazing and climb that corporate ladder.
yeah. I mean, that kind of fitting in, that sense of belonging and being overlooked is definitely going to knock your confidence. And I think, as
Yeah,
it's experienced uh, by many people of color, and perhaps people who are like one of the few, perhaps the only person who looks or sounds like them. It can even happen to people who are like working in male-dominated environments, so they're the only female as well. So
oh, sure.
that
Yeah,
sense of belonging for sure. I mean, it's important to understand that imposter syndrome is a belief system, and there are a number of factors that do feed into imposter feelings, like childhood messages from parents, carers, and teachers, issues relating to diversity and inclusion, which you've just been talking about there, Cici, and I'm sure there are many of our listeners who can resonate with what you've just said, as well as the confidence gap, occupational and situational factors, right? So, for example, I work in the creative industries. People who work in creative industries often talk about feeling like an imposter, which is hardly surprising when you consider that they are judged by subjective standards and often
sure.
by people whose job title is a professional critic. I mean, in advertising, you are reviewed for your work by,
Sure.
like a panel of people pretty much all the time. So, you're only as good as your last movie, your last album, your last book, or in advertising,
Right.
your last advertising campaign, right? And famous people who have admitted to experiencing imposter syndrome include like Michelle Pfeiffer, Tom Hanks, Taylor Swift, and even Michelle Obama, who is very open about her experiences with this phenomenon.
And hearing though that A list of people that you're sharing, someone like Michelle Obama, Tom Hanks, Michelle Pfeiffer, Taylor Swift, all these people that we know and we respect and we think so highly of, it makes it it makes it much more comforting to know that, okay, well, it's not just me, there are, these really amazing people and really talented other talented people like myself who also experience that. And it's
Mhm.
also humbling to know that it's people that you might not suspect.
Yeah.
I know one of my favorite authors, Maya Angelou, she also has experienced this
Yeah.
phenomenon. And she's even said, I've written 11 books, and each time I think, oh no, this time they're going to find
Oh,
me
yeah.
out.
Yeah.
Right, Maya Angelou. So it's in a way it's comforting, that's
Yeah.
at least, there are people who like we can all share this sentiment. And that's why I think it's even more important that we are, having this conversation here. And I'm gonna validate that statement by sharing some really interesting stats with you.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So According to KPMG, imposter syndrome is one of the least talked about but most prevalent issues facing professionals today.
Yep.
Another stat for you. 75% of female executives surveyed reported experiencing imposter syndrome.
Mm,
Another one,
mm,
53% of female professionals between the ages of 25 to 34 are currently experiencing imposter syndrome. This
mm-hmm,
one's really interesting. 85% of women have not spoken to someone at work about their struggles for fear of being seen as weak. And
mm,
even more startling is this one fact, less than 5% of employers directly address imposter syndrome with their staff. I
mm,
mean, like I
mm.
said,
Yeah.
I don't have to argue this
Huge
argument
stats. Yeah.
much further, right? This is why
Mm,
we're having the conversation right now. We need to normalize the conversation. If we don't talk about it, I
yeah.
see this all making that burnout cycle even worse in the years to come.
Oh, yeah, definitely. I mean, those are some powerful stats. And this isn't only a female issue, right? We need to be super clear that
Mhm.
everyone can experience imposter syndrome. So that's why normalizing it is an excellent tool to use.
Exactly. So I think, in terms of, when we think about how we can address this phenomenon head on, I do think it's important to have awareness of any situation before incorporating, strategies and tips and tricks to help you address it. So if you would like to know where you stand with imposter syndrome, we've we can drop a link to a free quiz created by Rachel here to give you an idea of how much imposter syndrome is affecting you. I promise it's a short quiz, but it will definitely give you some really rich insights. So, Rachel, let's talk about some strategies to address imposter syndrome.
Yeah, okay. So we briefly touched on one before, which is to normalize the experience. And, what we
Mhm.
mean by that is to talk about it. So break the silence and give yourself and others some relief from these perpetuating negative thoughts, which can spiral and in turn affect your ability to perform at your best. Now, this is especially important for those listening who are in leadership or management positions so that they can help people they manage understand that they are not alone. And potentially, you're going to create some bonds here over shared feelings and experiences, like get it out in the open. Also, at
Right.
the same time, we don't want to get stuck here because talking about our shortcomings doesn't really change that much. So that's why
Right.
understanding the different sources of imposter syndrome is useful, as well as working with some other tools.
Absolutely. And next, let's talk about the next strategy, which is to work on flipping that script. So I think you really have to build your mental agility to stop the negative self-talk in its tracks.
Yeah, this one is really useful. So look at how you can reframe those thoughts from, I don't know what I'm doing, to, I may not know right now, but I'm smart enough to find out.
Right.
Reframing is a very useful tool here, and one I highly recommend you practice using during these imposter moments. It does take practice. You have to be aware. One of the main things we're talking about. Notice these thoughts and then turn them into from something negative into something more useful, positive, and helpful.
Exactly, which actually is a nice segue into our next strategy here, and that's to separate the facts from fiction. So your accomplishments, those are facts, and no one can take that away from you.
Mm,
The fiction are the negative things that you tell yourself. And here's the thing, just because you're thinking those things, hey, it doesn't mean that they're true. It doesn't mean that other people are thinking them as well. So
mm.
a good place to start is for yourself to own your accomplishments. Now, for me, I do like to keep all the things I'm really proud of on a board in front of my at my desk, in front of my computer. It's a really good reminder of what I've done, all the great accomplishments, and it's something I'm really proud of. It's also really helpful when I need to promote myself to others because it's kind of like having your resume right in front of you.
Yeah, like having a file of all the kind of great things that you've done, all the great reviews you received, all the kind of
Mhm.
praise as well. That's super helpful, just a good reminder. But remember, when you do look at this accomplishments list, try to avoid giving reasons as to why those things happen, like luck or timing, and start owning
Right.
the part that you played in achieving them. so that we can kind of stop that imposter syndrome experience and feelings from happening.
Well, this has been a great time with you, Rachel, but let's take a few moments to recap some takeaways from this episode. Now, imposter syndrome is very common. You are not alone in this, and we have to normalize these conversations. So remember to flip the script and separate fact from fiction.
And own your accomplishments. And remember, imposter syndrome is a belief system. It's a mindset, and you can overcome it with these really useful tools. So take the free quiz using the link in the show notes to get some insight into how imposter syndrome might be affecting you if anything in this episode has resonated as a starting point. And get in touch with either of us if you'd like to bring some specific imposter syndrome training to your team. We both deliver fabulous workshops on this subject.
And if you are sitting here thinking about some people in your life and leaders that you may be working with and wondering how they really have it all together, please understand this. Honestly, no one knows what they are doing 100% of the time. We all have moments of vulnerability and desperation. So, everyone, thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Leading Ladies Who Lunch podcast. As we wrap up, take this with you. Out of everything that was shared, what is one thing you will do today to address when imposter syndrome shows up? If you like this episode, we would be so grateful if you could share it with your friends and tag us on social media at Leading Ladies Who Lunch. Your reviews of this podcast mean so much to us. We'd love it if you could rate it and subscribe to the show.
Remember, you can find us and subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and other podcast platforms. Subscribe to stay up to date with the latest episodes and follow us on Instagram at Leading Ladies Who Lunch.
Tune in 2 weeks, where we will continue our exploration of imposter syndrome with a part 2, where we debunk common myths about this phenomenon.
Oh yeah, can't wait for that one. Until then, stay sassy. Thank you for joining us on the empowering journey at the Leading Ladies Who Lunch podcast. We hope you've enjoyed our insightful discussions, actionable strategies, and inspiring stories that we break down during each episode. If you haven't already, make sure you subscribe to Leading Ladies Who Lunch on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your favorite podcast platform so you never miss an episode. And remember, the conversations you've heard on this podcast are just the beginning of your journey. Let your voice be heard, inspire change, and continue breaking barriers as you lead with authenticity, resilience, and unwavering determination.
Until next time, keep embracing your leadership potential, challenging the norms, and shaping a better world for women in the workplace. Leading Ladies Who Lunch, empowering women, changing lives.